Welcome, everyone. Just giving a moment and space here. If you're going back, joining us from back-to-back meetings, take a breath. Feel free to take your videos off for a moment, grab some water, grab anything that you need to feel comfortable in this space today. So cool to see so many different faces, new faces. Welcome. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining the 2024 Racial Equity Learning Lab public event. We truly appreciate sharing your time with us today. I know you must have a lot going on, and we really appreciate for you signing up and getting to know us a little bit in this space. I'm Trisha Bautista. I use she, her pronouns. I am located on the lands of the Council of the Three Fires, Odawa, Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi Nations, or what we now call Chicago. I am a program manager here at the National Farm to School Network, and I lead and manage the Racial Equity Learning Lab project along with my amazing team members who some of you will meet at some point today. I will pass it on to my co-facilitator, Elena Paisano, to introduce herself.
Goatsi, everybody. My name's Elena Paisano. I am serving as the National Farm to School Network Racial Equity Learning Lab consultant. I am an enrolled citizen of the San Carlos Apache Nation in Southeast Arizona and also Little Sun and Water Clan by adoption at Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico. I reside on Tewa lands, commonly known these days as Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm really eager to be here with you all today and have a chance to share a little bit more about the great work we've been doing around the Learning Lab and hopefully continue to build our community and invite you all into the space. So thank you, Trisha. I'll hand it over to Sunny.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So glad you're here. We know that there's a lot of things taking your attention these days, and we are so glad that you carved out this time for this information about the Racial Equity Learning Lab. And Elena, forever humble here, was the real generator of this project, and so many brilliant minds have gone into the development of the program. So we are so glad for y'all to join us and get to learn more about the unique special experience of Racial Equity Learning Lab. I'm Sunny Baker. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Director of Programs and Policy at National Farm to School Network. And I'm going to take a moment now to acknowledge the lands in which we all reside. So we acknowledge that we live and work on stolen land, that there are 574 federally recognized tribal nations in the U.S. and countless communities not counted in that list. We recognize that Indigenous peoples are very much with us today and acknowledge those who have been brave enough to stay behind, pay the ultimate sacrifice to survive. I'm tuning in from the ancestral lands of the Osage and the Quapaw, now known as Little Rock, Arkansas, and I encourage each of you to do your own research. I know that many of you have about your place and where you reside, and commit to that acknowledgement in action. We also acknowledge that we all arrived to this space on the shoulders of our ancestors who have lifted us and allowed us to arrive here. At NFSN, we strive to understand all of our partners in this work as unique people representing unique communities. And we're so glad to have you here today as your whole selves. So thank you for joining. We want to get to know you a little better too. So I'm going to pass it back over to Trisha to lead some introductions.
Thank you, Sunny. I appreciate that. Again, welcome, and I'm really excited to share about the rippling impact of the Racial Equity Learning Lab. But first, wanted to see if we can get to know who's in the room with us. So please share your name in the chat, pronouns, location, organization, if you are joining us on behalf of an organization. And just for something fun, we love doing this as part of the Racial Equity Learning Lab, sharing something about yourself, something personal about yourself, so maybe a favorite summer activity.
My name is Alfred Wisniewski. My pronouns are he, him. I'm from the New Jersey Department of Agriculture's Farm to School program. I'm the culinary lead for the program, and I'm the assistant for the Farm to School program. One of my favorite summer activities is saltwater fishing.
Awesome. Thanks, Alfred.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you hopping on like that.
Nice to meet everybody.
Nice to meet everyone. Yeah. Keep your intros coming in the chat as well. Appreciate Alfred for jumping in. We're going to move on, but we'd love for you all to keep sharing your intros in the chat. Again, your name, pronouns, location, and your favorite summer activity. We'd love to see who's in the room joining us here today. As part of getting to know you a little bit as well, some of you may be familiar with Mentimeter. We love Mentimeter at the National Farm to School Network. I'd love for you to either scan the QR code that's in front of you to participate, or go to menti.com and enter the code 56084992 and answer this question. What does it mean or look like for you to embed equity in your farm to school and early care education work? Now, if you're not specifically working in farm to school or ECE, and you're just here to support food systems work, that's okay. Feel free to participate as well. Or if you have some personal goals of embedding equity in your own personal lives, please share that as well. So what does it look like or mean for you to embed equity in your work, in your personal lives, or in farm to school and ECE? Because we are the National Farm to School Network after all. Community-centered, true partnerships. Co-design. Seen. I love that. Culturally relevant foods. Absolutely. Food sovereignty. Language access. Community engagement. Would love to talk more about that in future sessions. Sharing stories. The Racial Equity Learning Lab loves storytelling practices, and we integrate that. We're all about the abstract and different types of theoretical underpinnings in the Racial Equity Learning Lab. But one way we practice that and put that into action is storytelling. So because of time, I want to be mindful of time. I'm going to move on from this, but please keep participating. What I love to do after webinars like this and public events, I capture the overall word cloud picture and I share with everybody, along with some feedback that we will receive after this public meeting. So thank you so much for participating. So at the National Farm to School Network, we have a call to action that 100% of communities will hold power in a racially just food system. The Racial Equity Learning Lab is really just one of the ways in which we further this call to action through our work and in partnership. And again, she was so humble about it. Elena Paisano was the one who really generated this idea and concept of the Racial Equity Learning Lab. And we're so honored to have her here and working with us in implementing that work. What I'll be reading to you next is our positionality statement. So bear with me. This is our positionality statement as part of the project, the Racial Equity Learning Lab. NFSN acknowledges their power as a national organization and positionality as stewards of the lab, with the desire to work alongside cohort participants in imagining and transforming a system that works towards a racially just food system. NFSN, despite serving the role of a convener of this cohort, we are not claiming to be an authority on equity, but a co-participant in the space. NFSN intends to uplift the concept of cultural humility, which is the dynamic and lifelong process focusing on self-reflection, personal critique, and acknowledging of biases. Cultural humility underpins the importance of developing genuine connection and developing group trust. So, going into our meeting for today, we have quite a packed agenda. After this, I'm going to introduce you to our colleague from the USDA Community Food System, Erica Pijai, who will provide us with some welcome remarks on behalf of the USDA. We'll hear from Denee Bex, who will serve as our keynote speaker for the day. We'll talk a little bit about the principles of the Racial Equity Learning Lab. You hear more from Elena about the theoretical underpinnings of the lab. We also have a treat for today because we're going to see folks from the 2023 cohort. So we have some of the members from the last year's cohort to talk about the rippling impact and the highlights from their experience as part of the lab. And then I'm going to go to the logistical side of things and talk a little bit about recruitment, our next steps, and then hopefully we have some time at the end, maybe 5 minutes for some questions, and then we'll close from there. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic along to our colleague, Erica Pijai from the USDA.
Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Trisha. So good afternoon. I am Erica Pijai, and I use the she, her pronouns. I am the Senior Technical Advisor with the USDA Food and Nutrition Service Community Food Systems Division, better known as the USDA Farm to School program. So next slide, please. The USDA Farm to School program makes local food and agriculture education available to child nutrition program participants. Next slide. And we achieve these through grants, research, technical assistance, and training. And through this work, we hope to create thriving local food systems. Next slide. We are proud partners with the National Farm to School Network in the development of the Racial Equity Learning Lab and its vital work to support farm to school partners in rooting out inequities in the food system. So here at USDA Food and Nutrition Service, we know that food systems have been fraught with inequities, including those perpetuated by USDA's own policies and practices. As a result of lessons learned through the pandemic, USDA recognizes that we cannot go back to the food system we had before. We are working to build a more resilient and fairer food system where nutritious food is more accessible and affordable. Centering equity in this work is essential to achieving this food system, a food system that benefits all. Next slide. So USDA Food and Nutrition Service, along with the rest of the department, is working to prioritize equity every step of the way. We are mobilizing to break down the systematic barriers that have long hindered many communities from accessing our programs and services. At the USDA Farm to School program, we are taking actions to impact our sphere of influence. We are supporting culturally appropriate foods in school meals, using more locally grown food, and encouraging child nutrition programs to seek communities' input on including more culturally appropriate meals. And we are offering scoring incentives to advance equity through our USDA Patrick Leahy Farm to School grant program. And these include incentives to advance racial equity, support agricultural producers, and address persistent poverty in rural communities. We are partnering with nonprofit organizations like the National Farm to School Network through cooperative agreements to develop, strengthen, and expand national and regional level farm to school activities. Through a cooperative agreement, we're partnering with the National Farm to School Network on the Racial Equity Learning Lab to help farm to school partners embed equity into their work. We know this work is essential to creating thriving local food systems. So we have heard success stories from the first Racial Equity Learning Lab cohort, and we will listen to more today. Stories of how it's changing people personally and influencing their work. It's inspiring people to show up with empathy, compassion, and intention as they do the work to build a more equitable and resilient food system through farm to school. So we hope today's discussion inspires you and inspires the development of farm to school programs centered on equity, resulting in healthy people, communities, and agricultural economies that serve all. Thank you. So Trisha, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Erica. I really appreciate that welcome remarks from the USDA. Next, we're going to hear from Denee Bex, who's going to be our keynote speaker for today. Denee Bex is an award-winning registered dietitian from the Denee Navajo Nation and is an advocate for healthy diets, which include cultural foods without judgment in Native communities. She is the Charcoal Street Division of the Red Dunning Running into Water clan and born to the Coyote Pass people. She received a Bachelor of Science in Nutrition from Arizona State University in 2011, a Master of Public Health with a focus on community health education in 2017 from New Mexico State University, and is a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She completed her dietetic internship with Wellness Workdays, which helped her realize the power of entrepreneurship. She received her registration status and licensure in 2018. She has worked in Native communities for over 10 years and recognizes and understands the challenges and barriers to an equitable health and focus on providing inclusive nutrition education to her Native community. She has been featured in numerous publications, including the New York Times, Leading the Way, the Arizona Republic, and various podcasts. Denee is the owner and founder of Tumbleweed Nutrition, LLC, a nutrition education consultant company that aims to provide inclusive and evidence-based nutrition consultations for organizations and farms, which honors American Indian history and heritage. With that, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the mic to Denee Bex.
All right. So can everybody hear me? Thumbs up. We're good. Okay, perfect. So yate everybody, thank you for having me here today. My name is Denee Bex, and I am a dietitian from the Navajo Nation, or Denee Nation. She'e Denee Bex Yinashia, Nanashtaja Tachini Nishla, Maidishki Bashchi, Tkodachini Dashache, Kia Ani Dashanella. I just introduced myself with my clans in Navajo, and the first two clans were the translations that Trisha had mentioned. And I am honored to speak to you about how I have used my lived experiences and values to work more closely with tribal communities. My work is focused on empowering Native people through inclusive food and nutrition education, while building intentional community and strengthening local food systems. I am the owner and founder of Tumbleweed Nutrition, LLC, which I founded in 2021 to help tribal organizations, schools, and Native-owned farms deliver culturally respectful nutrition education and food in their own communities. For us as Indigenous people, our values are deeply rooted in our traditions, our culture, and our connection to the land and each other. As a dietitian, my goal is to translate these values into our healthcare and school systems. But first, I'd like to tell you a story about me and why this work is important to me. And the title of the presentation is called Cultivating Connection and Building Community with Indigenous Farmers. Next slide. So I'll get a little personal here. So as a child, I experienced intense trauma when I was around 6 or 7. I grew up in a large and low income family, and my emotional needs weren't quite met in the way I needed it to be. And essentially I self-medicated with food. That was, my coping mechanism. While my parents tried their best to meet my needs, I eventually veered into thoughts of self-harm because I felt like I couldn't live in my thoughts. As a result, when I felt uncomfortable in my body or in general, I would seek food as a way to comfort myself. So when I left for college, next slide. So when I left for college, I became vegetarian. I feel like that's all dietitians path. We all resort to vegetarianism or veganism, thinking that my body size was just a matter of willpower, quote unquote willpower. So I restricted what I ate, despite my favorite foods being chicken and Navajo tacos. I worked out for really long hours and I ran long distance. I still work out now, but not as much as I used to. And I never reached that quote unquote healthy weight. And I always blamed myself for those weekend binges. I tried seeing the college therapist, but it just didn't work out. So these are some pictures of me during that time. Next slide. At ASU, I pursued a nutrition degree thinking somehow this would quote unquote fix me. I told myself if I only knew enough, then I'll be smaller. I was taught that the best evidence-based diets were the Eurocentric ones, the foods that white people were eating. So diets like Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, and vegetarian diet. And if people have access to that, more power to them. However, my community doesn't.
No, thank
And
you.
back at school, I was taught that we needed to eat more like white people to achieve health. And after I graduated, I worked in Native communities, finding that these Eurocentric diets like Mediterranean, DASH, and vegetarian were just not meeting the needs of our communities and didn't really recognize our access to resources. Next slide. So I started my business to be part of the solution. I recognize that we have a collective part in our healing, and all it takes is compassion towards ourselves and our community. And I realize that we can collaborate with our community and schools without fear mongering. And many times our tribal foods, our indigenous foods have been basically made to be the bad guy. We were told that our indigenous foods were not healthy and we had to eat more of these, other foods, more of these foods that are accessible to wider communities. So since I left my job at the hospital in 2022, I worked in the hospital system for about 5 years as an outpatient dietitian and diabetes educator. I left in 2022, and I've had amazing experiences in working with schools and Native-owned farms to translate some of that work. So for me, this work is about empowering our Native communities. And my goal is to support our schools and farms the best way that I can. And the best way I can is by offering my dietitian services to them. Next slide. So these photos are proof of how this work isn't just about decreasing health disparities, although that is part of it. More importantly, it's about rebuilding our community. I was recently, last year, I was invited to the birth of my friend and farmer's new baby girl, Haya. And this is the farm that they grow corn, native white corn. They grow 15 acres of native white corn. And I was invited to the birth of Haya. Mary and her husband, Zach, grow 15 acres of white, yellow, and blue corn. They grew some Oaxacan green corn last year. I think it was like half an acre or an acre. And so it's so fun working with them. And they produce out of all of their product, their biggest product is creating an indigenous baby food product. It's ground nishtiji, which is native white corn that's been ground into like a cereal. And so Mary and Zach, they decided to have a home birth, but instead of their home, they built an area on their cornfield to function as their birthplace. Haya was born on their cornfield and is named after the yellow corn that I helped plant earlier that year. As I cut Haya's umbilical cord at 2 a.m. with tears in my eyes, I thought, this is where we need to be. This is what we're working towards. I recently heard from a Navajo elder that the cornfield is where we heal our trauma. And I couldn't agree more. And so these pictures, I took a bunch of pictures, but a lot of them are graphic. So we'll settle with these ones. Next slide. So we've cultivated this connection, this friendship. I wouldn't say business relationship because that's too sterile. Yes, we do business some of the time. They do also have a 501(c), which they get grants through. But it's not just purely a sterile business relationship. We invest in each other. We both support the same vision, and the same vision is introducing native foods into our communities, reintroducing it, making them relevant. And part of that vision that we share is integrating native foods into our school systems to make sure that the native students see themselves in the food that is offered. And so, you know, we host different cooking classes, we host different events during the summer, because summer's, you know, when everybody's out, nobody wants to be on the cornfield during the winter. And so this was our most recent cooking class. We called it the WOBA cooking class. And WOBA means, it's like a saying you say in Navajo, where if you do something really clumsy or you fall or you make a mistake, you say WOBA. And so we called it it was called the WOBA defense class. And we invited Nico Montano. She was the first Native mixed martial artist champion. And then I did the cooking class. And so it was called WOBA defense class and snack attack. So next slide. So this was like just 2 weekends ago. So my values guide my work. I feel strongly that I can't do my best work unless it aligns with my personal values of creativity, community, gratitude, balance, self-care, and having fun. And this all leads to empowerment, not just for myself, but for my community. So when we align our work with our values, we show our communities the best of us. For farm to school initiatives, we need to ask ourselves if our personal values are reflected in our relationships with farmers and schools. Next slide. As school nutrition professionals, we hold power. We all have different skills and we all have different levels of power. And I think it's important to recognize that, because when I was starting my business, I felt so powerless. And that was, you know, the reason why I started my business was to regain some of that power. And so in working with the schools in my area, you know, part of that is reclaiming power, that having that relationship, building those relationships is about reclaiming power. And so we can use this power to influence how our communities are represented. For me, because I'm from the Navajo Nation, I want to see more Native representation in our schools and in the food we provide to our students. Our communities have been told that our Native foods are bad for our health, quote unquote, bad. We are now at a point where our communities are feeling empowered enough to fight back against this rhetoric. We are looking towards the future and asking ourselves, what can we do to integrate more Indigenous foods into our schools? We are recognizing that our lifestyles weren't, quote unquote, bad, like we were told for centuries. And instead, we need to look back at our traditional foods and celebrate them. And one way to celebrate them is in the school setting. Next slide. So I ask all of you guys to ask, how do we integrate traditional or Native foods into our schools, even if your student population isn't majority Native? And so this is where the term food sovereignty comes in. Food sovereignty, I have conflicted feelings about using the word food sovereignty, but just to give you an overall idea, food sovereignty is basically the right of the people to define their own food systems. It emphasizes local control over food production, distribution, and consumption. The concept prioritizes sustainable and culturally appropriate food practices, ensuring that communities have the power to produce healthy and nourishing food through ecologically sound and sustainable methods. As school nutrition professionals and professionals who work with schools, like myself, we absolutely can help the Indigenous food sovereignty movement. We all have the skills and talents that can empower our Native communities and build relationships with Indigenous farmers and increase representation of Native foods in our schools. Next slide. So where do we start? There are many different ways we can support Indigenous food sovereignty. I'll give you some of my own ideas. But these are kind of the 6 basic ways I like to envision things. I like to put things in boxes and categories. So these are my own ways. And so how do we integrate more foods, and how do we integrate the concept of food sovereignty into our schools? First thing is we can educate not only students about native foods and history, but also our school staff. When I worked with some local schools who the staff were non-native, they didn't know how to use some of the native foods like blue corn. And for community or tribal members, it's like, well, duh, you just use it this way. But we need to also understand that, we have to do that bridge work. How do we bridge a lot of these concepts? And so that's kind of where I come in is okay, I'm a dietitian. I know how to calculate things and write out recipes, standardized recipes. So how do we do that for our indigenous foods? So the second thing is, we can support our native students by increasing representation of native foods in our menus and school gardens, and talk about, the different fruits and vegetables that native communities have cultivated over the centuries, over the thousands of years. The other thing that's really important too is supporting native farmers through offering technical assistance in getting their foods into our schools. Native farmers are farmers. They just they innately understand that we need to increase food access in many of our tribal communities. That's part of closing the gap to these disparities. They understand that. That's why they're farmers. They want to provide food for their communities. However, when it comes to trying to sell to schools, there's a little bit of it's a little bit challenging because they know the land, they know the cycles, they know the weather, notwithstanding climate change. That's another story. But how do we offer our those technical skills to make sure that their foods are eventually brought into the schools? And so that's something that definitely native farmers need that assistance. The next thing is, we need to make sure we're purchasing from verified native food producers. There are food producers who we need to make sure we're including. So, working with local farmers and vetting that, they produce the foods that are native to their communities. And so we need to make sure that we are verifying the food that we produce are native or indigenous owned. The fourth thing is that we need to advocate on behalf of our farmers to administrators to ensure native food and education is present in our schools. So, with my work with some local schools, sometimes administrators, they just don't know why it's important to include native foods. And that's part of where, yes, we can get frustrated at the system, but then also I view it more of as maybe a challenge, but also an opportunity to be like, look, we need to talk about native foods. We need to talk about why it's important for our students to understand that. And have these one-on-one conversations with administrators to make sure that we are bringing in those foods into our schools. The fifth thing is that we can gather at indigenous-owned farms to celebrate our communities, like the Woba cooking class, and their farm is open to other schools as well to do tours. And so we need to make sure that we're also gathering on the farms too, to show the farmers your work is important. We recognize you. We see your hard work. And that just keeps them going. And finally, we should collaborate with Native healthcare professionals and food producers to create more inclusive environments. We don't have to do everything here. I certainly can get overwhelmed with this list. So I like to choose just like what I'm into at that very moment. It is hard to tackle these systems that prevent us from being represented, but we can look at little small things that we can work on in our own work. And so I'm pretty sure I left many more ideas out about how to include more indigenous foods into our school systems. But the most important thing I wanted to remind us of is that we have power. We have power to influence how food sovereignty is executed in our school systems. We have the power to change the environment our students and staff are in, if only we ask, what environment can we create to facilitate each of these areas? That's our power. That's our superpower, is that we have the ability to influence. So next slide. So with that, I'd like to show you a video. This was just published like a few weeks ago, so I wanted to share it with you all. And some of you have may seen this, but I think most of you haven't. So we can go ahead and hit play. Hi, my name is Denee Bex, and I am the founder and owner of Tumbleweed Nutrition, LLC. And I am a Navajo registered dietitian, and I offer nutrition education consulting services to tribal organizations and Native-owned farms. When I was working in the clinic, I noticed there was a lack of dietitians who were available for tribal organizations. Often what would happen is that tribal organizations would request clinical dietitians to do a lot of community nutrition work. I created the business because there was a gap in accessing dietitian services, and specifically dietitians who are familiar with the Native community. That's very rare, actually. There are over 106,000 dietitians across the nation, and 0.4% identify as Indigenous or Native. And so that creates an issue when you're trying to analyze menus or do a recipe analysis, especially for Indigenous foods. And so I wanted to provide those services and be more accessible to these tribal organizations and to farmers as well. I wanted to bring that representation there in this dietetic and nutrition spaces, saying like, hey, okay, we can use what we have. We can use these activities that we do, these community activities that we already participate in. How do we use that as a base to build from there? You know, I think there's a lot of power in eating good food, and not just physically, but also socially and communally. And that's what I really enjoy about working in Native communities, is that we kind of innately understand that. In Navajo and in other Indigenous cultures, it's like, we've already known this. We've already known to give gratitude and to have that thankfulness for our food sources and for the people around us who are preparing those foods. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that, you know, I talk so much about why it's important to have representation, because I'm gonna start crying. Because Indigenous foods matter. It matters for our social well-being. It's not just about nutrition. It's about our strength. It's about our resilience. And for me to use my knowledge that I got in college, and the reason why I spent so much time in getting my education was because I wanted to give back. Because so much has been given to me, so many experiences have been given to me, and I wanted an opportunity to provide that back to my own community. So this is my call to action. I challenge each of you to think about how you can build connections and relationships with Indigenous communities in your work. You don't have to make it a huge thing. Go over to a nearby farmer, ask if you can pull weeds, volunteer for harvest season, create a recipe for them using one of their products. The goal is to highlight community. The goal is to highlight relationships instead of nutrition. Yes, nutrition is part of it. And it's part of closing the gap to many of our health disparities, but it goes beyond that. And I want us to recognize that we are stronger as a community, and we can use our stories to empower each other. Thank you for your attention and your time today. Yeah.
Virtual claps. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What a delight to have you in this space today. And it's such a pleasure to get connected with you. I love that you already sent me a recipe last night for a blue corn pancake. So I'm going to make sure to make that this weekend. Thank you so much. You also have some lovely notes in the chat, Denee, if you want to check them out. But yeah, thank you so much. If you have
Thank you for
questions,
having me, everyone.
yeah,
Your
thank
work is important. Thank you so much.
just taking a moment here to switch gears. We're going from that lovely story to a little bit more about the Racial Equity Learning Lab, but I just want to give space for folks in the room. If you want to share any comments in the chat for Denee, please do so. She also can share her email address, or I know she has a very active Instagram account too, if you want to continue following her work.
Oh yeah. I'm on Instagram. I forget. I was telling somebody, I was like, I don't remember. Sometimes I don't remember that it's public, a lot of my work.
No,
And then
people
people
know
say
you.
like, oh, you were over there. And I'm like, how did you know that?
That's so lovely. Yeah, I've already told you stories of folks I met last week or a couple weeks ago at Shelburne Farms. But thank you again. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for joining us today, Denee.
Have a good day, everyone.
Now, switching gears to why we're here today, which is the Racial Equity Learning Lab. Before we hear from our 2023 cohort members who have graciously joined us today, I wanted to just ground us with some overview information. The Racial Equity Learning Lab, first and foremost, is a cooperative agreement between the National Farm to School Network and the USDA Community Food System Division. One thing that we really like to highlight about the Racial Equity Learning Lab is that it steers away from training of the trainer model. And it isn't quite an equity 101 or an equity training either. Through facilitated virtual learning sessions, co-facilitated by myself and Elena, who you'll hear from in a moment, we also encourage and folks in the cohort members lead these discussions themselves. In the lab, we really go through cross-sectoral and community-oriented discussions around ways to advance our work, our equity in our work, and really embed that. And what does that look like? Because it could, for some people, I always hear like, what does that look like in action? And in the Racial Equity Learning Lab, we really focus on action and what that could look like. What's unique about this process as well is everyone is at different stages or different types of work themselves. We had a couple of producers and farm business owners in our last cohort. We have folks who represented the nonprofit space and school nutrition department in a school district. But somehow, and this to this day inspires me, especially seeing the in-person meeting unfold last year, we were able to really ground ourselves and uplift the value of what action could look like for each of us with support and advice from each other. Part of our activities, for instance, in the in-person meeting, we shared some of the goals and action steps we would like to see in our own work through what we call appreciative inquiry. So I'm not going to go into detail of what that is, but that's just an example of how, despite having different roles in the farm to school space or in the food system space, we're able to connect, offer feedback, offer advice through a really consent-based, value-based engagement with each other. I also want to mention, I certainly have learned tremendously from the folks in the space and the cohort, and have even improved my facilitation skills. I approach these kinds of meetings and facilitation spaces a little bit differently than I did a couple years ago. And so I'm really grateful. And again, that's just like one little nugget that I want to mention in this space. The last thing I'll mention is we have a lab roadmap. So this is the curriculum guide for the Racial Equity Learning Lab. And this was created in partnership and in collaboration with the Lab's Advisory Council. I encourage you all to check them out on our website. They're still being shown and described on there with their headshots and bios, and I just wanted to flag that. But that collaboration started in 2022, and the lab roadmap really channels seasons in each of the sessions. So for the first session, for instance, this invites winter. So where we dive into history, what shared language means in equity work, and what that entails, co-analysis of historical inequities in the food system. When we bring in spring in the next couple of sessions, this is where we deepen in our understanding of the work. You know, somebody mentioned spring is all about the headspace and growth of foundation, where we can have a lot of the reimagining take place. We channeled the summer season in our third session, which happens to be the in-person meeting, which last year happened in New Orleans. And that was intentional because during the summer, we do a lot of hands-on work, and we intended to integrate those types of hands-on in-person activities that hopefully, and I was inspired throughout that process, inspired and motivated folks to do more community building with each other. And, you know, we received some feedback from folks about how it was really nice to have that summer session or in-person session halfway through the Racial Equity Learning Lab, because it bridged those connections between people. It really forged those connections in a really strong way. And finally, we closed the lab roadmap with the fall season in mind. And this is when we harvest our learnings with each other, and celebrate our learnings collectively and reflect on what the experience has been like. And I know that probably sounds all philosophical and abstract, which is something that I appreciate about the Racial Equity Learning Lab being a very, you know, somebody who appreciates these kinds of outline and agenda and that kind of thing, but it's to see it unfold so beautifully and to see tangible outcomes come out of this experience has been a really beautiful experience. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Elena to talk more about the theoretical underpinnings.
Thank you, Trisha. Yeah, I just want to speak a little bit more to the intentionality of designing around the seasons. That comes from my own sort of lived experience in how we function as community and my family and in my native community, and really considering, you know, what are the different phases that we go through in our mental health and in our physical health throughout the year. So Trisha did a beautiful job of discussing that, but, you know, winter really being a time to tune into our spirit and hold that sort of higher than intellect level of learning, and spring being like planning, really diving in, leaning into the intellect, the knowledge, the technicalities. You know, moving into summer, which is, yeah, as Trisha said, getting our hands dirty, right? Doing the work and doing it together. Hard work is always done in community. And then taking that moment to celebrate and feed our hearts, feed our souls in the fall. And for us, that means inviting even more folks into our community. And the whole goal here is to wrap around to a space of wholeness in the work and feel like I now have sort of consumed this Racial Equity Learning Lab experience. So I'll just kind of put that on there as well. Some of the underpinnings that really hold the space and what we have used is not only values for the work, but how we actually operationalize the Racial Equity Learning Lab comes in line with thinking about racial equity learning work as not being outcome driven, but process driven, right? And so really acknowledging that we're not going to get to the outcomes that we're hoping to pursue unless we change the way we do business. And this is very much not business as usual. For our Learning Lab cohort members, I think they can speak to this, but it's a different type of space where we welcome emergent agendas, right? So we don't come in with like, this is where we're headed today, we have to get to that point. The idea is that it's emergent, and also that, as Trisha started to tell the story, we're weaving in the context of place, the context of time. We're not working in a vacuum, right? We live in community and in society where many things are changing, and where we are also responsive to who's in the room, who comes into the space. So each and every Learning Lab cohort will look different, feel different, and we'll all engage in a slightly different conversation. That leads us into the collaborative nature, which again, by collaborative, we really mean co-constructing. So it's not just collaborating on an agenda that NFSN or, you know, any of us sets forward. It's co-constructing what the environment looks like, where we want to spend more time. That looks like sharing resources amongst the groups. As Trisha said, that's also asking our cohort members to step up where they feel comfortable and share their assets and unique perspectives. We learn from each other. As you're probably gathering, this all leads to a very non-linear process, and that's part of the beauty, is that, you know, I know that we like to say at NFSN, racial equity work is a journey. Not only is it a journey, but it's a journey that takes us back to infancy pretty frequently, right? You'll be like, oh, I'm feeling good, I'm rocking and rolling, and then you'll have an experience out there in the world that you're like, whoa, gut check, there's something I need to kind of move backwards and take that learning from this broader community. So the hope is that we move through that non-linear process together, held in safe space alongside other practitioners. We work really hard to make sure that what we're doing isn't too theoretical. This feels very theoretical, but the goal is actually just to be in authentic space together as much as humanly possible and ground us in the reality of context. Something that frustrates me when I'm doing this kind of work and trying to help folks is, I think a lot of times it's like, okay, tell me the 3 things I can do to do more racially impactful work, right? Just tell me what I can do. And it's like, well, tell me about your community. Let's talk for hours and days about your community, and then maybe we can land there. And so everything that we do is focused on trying to be responsive to context and be grounded in community, including community cultures and ways of being that we hold when we step into this space. Again, this is not outcome driven, it's process driven. And so we're really welcoming and open to exploring diverse outcomes. And as I mentioned, our intention here is that each cohort feels different, looks different, and we learn something different from each one of them. And so we do adopt an evaluation process that's rooted in racial equity, and that helps us to kind of look at our outcomes, but these are not static. And then the last one, again, is culturally responsive, and I would say even responsible, right? So the goal here is not only to be responsive to the cultures of the folks coming into the cohort, but also cognizant that we are creating a culture within this work that has impacts on the larger farm to school movement. And so really trying to uplift and hold each one of us in the ways that we need through our own individualized cultures that we bring to the space, but then also exploring what it looks like to lend a little of each of ourselves to create a shared community culture in the cohort space, and then offer that to all of you, which today's webinar is a perfect example of that. So I'm really honored today to be here alongside some of our cohort members who are going to illustrate exactly what I just spoke of and share some of their lived experience in the lab. So thank you, Trisha.
Thank you, Elena. I love listening to you speak. I feel like we hang out like once a month, and I'm still so in awe and inspired by how you describe this process. So thank you so much. Before I pass it on to our cohort members, I'm so honored to share this amazing graphic recording with you. We partnered with Yen Azaro to somehow show the rippling impact of the Racial Equity Learning Lab from the 2023 experience using symbols and some of the quotes from their testimonials. So I'm going to play it for a couple minutes, and then I will pass it on to our cohort members to share a little bit about their experience. That's it. Thanks, folks. And I just want to give a shout out to our comms intern, Ananya, who added that beautiful music, which I can't stop thinking about now. I'm going to pass it on to our cohort members. Oops. I don't know who wants to go first. Let's see. Would Tracy like to go first? Oh,
Yeah, I'll take it away. First of all, hi Sai Woganabida. All, my name is Tracy Kimura, and I accept she, her, they, them pronouns, and I am currently residing on Ahakdamen territory in Anaheim, California. I work for the California Department of Food and Ag. I am a producer engagement specialist for the greater LA region, including LA, Orange, and San Bernardino counties. And so my role is really focused on supporting producers to enter into the farm to school space, whether through sales or through experiential education. So I'm just super, super thankful. Earlier, I said, good morning and nice to meet you. Thank you in the Okinawan language. And this experience definitely had like professional and personal impacts on my life. I never really considered, I've always wanted to learn the Okinawan language, but I never really considered the implications until like meeting Stormy and like hearing other native stories about like the struggles of keeping the language alive. I always felt like I couldn't do it because like I didn't have an elder, I don't have a community to practice with, but just hearing the significance and importance of like the visibility and maintaining the awareness of Okinawan language and culture has been super impactful. And so starting little bits by little bits. And then second of all, like the timing for this program was really amazing because I was literally starting in my role at CDFA, and I feel like I was having just so much like what is imposter syndrome and like how am I here? I'm gonna like tear up, but like just the space was so warm and so important to building my confidence and strength in this space and just connecting with other people who relate. And it's a really amazing experience, and it helped make me feel stronger, like just that we're not in this work alone. And it was so intentional and authentic. And I feel like I have friends for life in different areas of the US, so I'm really excited to continue those relationships and learning. And then finally, in my professional work, during this period of like starting at CDFA, I feel really, I am bilingual in Spanish. So in this period, I helped to establish like a cohort of other bilingual staff on the farm to school team. And so we have these separate discussions, and I help kind of cultivate a process to help other staff members get certified bilingual. And so in that space, we're able to not only discuss language access and equity in our own programs, but we're able to like through that lens talk about other equity issues. So I'm really excited to continue to grow this work on the team because this work is so new in the state of California. I mean, it's been there, but it's just expanded exponentially from a small team of I think 4 that was covering the state to now a huge regional team that's growing to like 20. So it's super important to have these connections and relations to really support expanding racial equity in a good way in the state of California here. So thank you so much. I'll pass it on to the next cohort member who'd like to share.
I can share. And Yaza, you can close us out. Hello, everybody. My name is Petrilli. I utilize they, she pronouns, and I reside and organize on ancestral Nacoshank land, known as the District of Columbia. And so I came into this space, the Racial Equity Learning Lab cohort, as somebody that was pretty seasoned in farm to school, having 15 years of experience in the nonprofit and public sector, but had stepped away the past 4 to 6 years to really I basically unraveled as a human being and recommitted to liberatory praxis. And so I am now an independent consultant and founder of Embodied Lib. That started out as a community platform, but now it's a practice that serves those that are committed to improving the health and well-being of the systemically marginalized. And being part of this Racial Equity Learning Lab cohort
Good, I'm here.
also had that kind of imposter syndrome. Like at first I was like, do I really belong here? Like, I feel like I'm a little bit older, like my perspective is a little bit different, but really something that I'm walking away with. And I think Elena and Trisha both beautifully demonstrate is just the thoughtfulness and the intentionality behind the curation of us as a group, but also the spaces and the containers that were made for us to really dream and to be in community. And what I love about this meeting in particular, but I think reflects kind of the vibe and energy of the cohort is, you know, when tears are flowing like this, like you can really tell this is a healing centered space, right? Because it's like tears are flowing and we are in the midst of healing. So yeah, I was able to, you know, really meet and develop deeper relationships with folks from across the food system and across the different pillars of food justice. And, you know, really found that they were folks that even though we worked in different parts of the food system and around the different pillars, it was beautiful to find so many people that had values that were aligned with mine and had this kind of bold and like innovative vision around food and nourishment, and specifically the farm to school movement. So yeah, I was honored to be part of the group like Tracy. I left with really soulful connections, and I cannot wait until we meet again in Minneapolis next month.
Amazing. Thanks, y'all. It's really awesome to hear your reflections on the lab. And I'm really honored to be here. My name is Yaza Surya. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for Georgia Organics, which is based in Atlanta, the ancestral lands of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And I typically work with school districts to help them build their farm or farm to school programs and elevate their garden and nutrition education based on how they see fit. So the real experience was really transformative for me, like in a very personal as well as professional way. Personally, I'm Palestinian, and so I started the real journey right around the time that everything started happening in Gaza, and just being in that supportive space and kind of reflecting on how I can use my positionality to show my identity in my work and to really use that strength to my advantage was really, really healing. Just kind of as Patricia said, like it was just a very, very healing space. In terms of like professionally, I loved Real because it exposed us to so many different like thought-provoking ideas and resources that were meant to help us reimagine the farm to school movement and to think through like how we can collectively use our assets and talents within our communities to really see that vision forward. And so that was really awesome and something that I am hoping to continue working towards within my own community. And then in terms of networks, kind of as Patrouille and Tracy mentioned, like it was so amazing just to learn from the lab cohort members because they all came from so many different backgrounds and had so many different experiences in the food system as a whole. And so that was really informative for me. And especially like as someone who's kind of starting the equity and anti-racism journey, I would say in my work, I felt that it was really awesome to kind of like have everybody in that space. And it really created like a free and safe space for us to like think through and grapple with some really big ideas and some growth opportunities, and just to think about like where we could go next in our communities. So it was really awesome. I loved Reel. I think all of us were really sad when it ended, honestly, because we just wanted more and more and more. And so I really think it's like a great way to like get started in your equity journey if you're trying to like make it more intentionally a part of your work.
Thank you all so much. I feel like I can't go on right now because I'm kind of getting emotional too. Thank you so much. Really appreciate hearing those stories. Alina, before I move on to the logistical side of things and recruitment, wanted to give space for you to share any thoughts, or yeah, just didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
Oh, no, not at all. Again, just so much gratitude to each of you for sharing and for holding this space. I think as somebody who, yeah, dreamed this up a little bit, it's been amazing to actually dream something that felt radical and see it come to fruition. And even in our early conversations, we're like, how are we going to do this? What does that actually look like? And I think there was a healthy amount of skepticism from some of us. Yeah, that it was like, I don't think it can be done. And so, it's being done, and it's beautiful, and it's lovely to see us all sort of pushing that boundary, and the amount of bravery and authenticity that people have shown up with is truly humbling. And it's like, I crave that space. And so thank you, you guys, everybody who's participated and helped to create this. Thank you for that, because it has been healing. And I also want to say it's not over, because we're going to see each other in Minneapolis, and then y'all are coming to my home in New Mexico, hopefully for the conference, and we'll do something awesome here. So yeah, the idea is that our cohorts build this bigger community, and not community of practice, just community, right? And we continue to hold that space, hopefully in whatever our journeys take us to. So thank you. Thanks, Trisha.
thank you so much, Alina. Well, now that you've all heard a little bit more about the Racial Equity Learning Lab and some of the experiences from our cohort members last year, I'm going to lead us through the next few minutes about how to join the 2024 Racial Equity Learning Lab cohort. So first of all, who should join this cohort? First of all, for the most part, I think we really want to, of course, prioritize individual for, working in the farm to school and early care education space or food system space, food producers, coordinators, farm to school coordinators, food service members, school teachers and educators, just to name a few. And in the last cohort, like I mentioned earlier, we had folks who were farmers and farm business owners and school nutrition folks, and the synergy and sort of the co-learning process through those different experiences in the farm to school and food system space was really helpful in cultivating what it looks like to operationalize and equity in farm to school and in the movement. Folks who represent nonprofit organizations, state agencies, school districts, business owners, again, farm ranchers. These are just to name a few stakeholders, but really anyone who's also interested in joining a community and being a part of creating a healing space in the virtual space, but also have the opportunity to build community even more together in person. We're going to go back to New Orleans this December, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And finally, advocates and communities committed to embedding racial equity in the farm to school and early care education movement. We're also hoping to see folks mention alignment with NFSN's vision and our call to action commitment to, again, embedding that equity lens in the work that we do. This could be through personal stories or examples, as you've seen earlier in the presentations. The through line is storytelling, and so anything that you could really highlight and tell about the story about yourselves or about the work that you're doing, we'd love to see that in the interest form process, which I'm going to talk about next. We have a two-step application process. They're not very long. We just like to have these kind of two different waves of interaction with folks who are interested. The first one is an interest form. This is super short. It's just, letting us know your name, getting to know you a little bit, and then just kind of gauging your interest and your capacity in joining. So this is where we ask you your work in the farm to school movement or in the food system space, capacity to join. We're gonna be communicating the schedule of the Racial Equity Learning Lab sessions in advance. And so just making sure that you know all of those details and logistics. And then telling us a little bit about what inspires you to join this process, especially maybe after joining this public event, and also if you're watching this recording later. In this interest form, you're also going to be able to communicate how you would like to do the second application process. Do you want to submit an audio recording, a video recording, or a written narrative? And in that narrative, it's going to be a little bit more in depth about your personal experiences, and again, your interest in joining the cohort. Just again, emphasizing that storytelling process is really important in the Racial Equity Learning Lab. So I also just want to highlight in the second process, you have the opportunity to select how you would like to submit your second application. So again, through a video, or you can set up a video or a phone call for a quick 20-minute, 30-minute conversation with one of us in our team. Or you can submit a written application process or an audio response. The timeline, we currently have our interest form up. My colleague Passion from the National Farm to School Network will share the interest form link in the chat. The interest form is going to close on July 15th. And then our internal team will review the interest forms as they come in. We've been reviewing some of them as they were coming in, because we were also kind of promoting this a little bit before this webinar. Our goal is to select our semifinal candidates by July 24. And then we are going to ask folks to submit that secondary application by August 2nd. And then our goal between August 2nd and August 19, I'll be communicating with folks who submitted that secondary application, getting their confirmation of participation, again, communicating the logistics. In this process, I will also be sharing a draft memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, which lays out the outline of expectations, and again, those schedules of meetings, which I'm going to go over in a moment, and then talk a little bit more about the in-person meeting in New Orleans, which is scheduled in December this year. And then finally, the very first lab session 1 is scheduled for. I do want to share that we have a welcome session. It's a little bit more informal on August 30th for the 2024 cohort members, and it's an opportunity to meet our USDA colleagues, more folks in our team at the National Farm to School Network. Passion, for instance, will be there, our co-executive directors, Sunny Baker. So it's going to be a little bit bigger of a group, but it's, again, just a way to kind of get to know each other. And because in the Racial Equity Learning Lab, we really want to make sure we're putting emphasis in relationships, and that's why we have that bonus session to welcome each other. And that's going to be on August 30th. So a little bit about the commitment. I did my best to give us a little bit of an estimate. So about 3 to 4 hours per month. For 7 months, we don't have a meeting in November, and that is because we want to make sure we give you ample time to connect with us before we have our next meeting, in-person meeting, which is going to be in December 4 through 5th. One of the feedback, among the feedback that we received from cohort members last year we did the in-person meeting for 1 full day. It was November 15th, which was great, but it felt like a lot for 1 day. And so one thing I also want to emphasize as part of the Racial Equity Learning Lab, we do a mini project evaluation throughout the process. We have interviews and mid-session interviews with cohort members where myself and colleagues at NFSN conduct. We also have reflections after each meeting, and it's our goal, it's mine and Elena's goal, to address those feedback as we go as best as we can. But yeah, so one of the feedback that we received was, 1 full day, and traveling is just a lot. And so this year we are going to do a day and a half. So on December 4th, we're going to start at noon and end around 4:30, 5 p.m. And then we're going to have the second day, which is going to be in the morning from 9 to 12. And we'll have an optional field trip option that we're still planning. So if you have recommendations or ideas, we're going to be in New Orleans for that. We're also going to have the meeting at the NOCA. So that's the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. Looking at it. I did not prepare. I mentioned, but yeah, I will link that in for more information about where we're going to be holding that meeting. And to break it down a little bit, so the meetings are 1.5 to 2 hour Zoom meetings. We have what we use a digital learning platform space called House Space. And that is a way for us to continue the learning and connection between one another. And so in this digital learning platform, that's where we include the lab roadmap in a more detailed way. We also include articles, stories, videos, audio podcasts, and that kind of thing. But also built in each of those that supports each of the session, we have a forum where a lot of our lab cohort members will interact, respond to some discussion prompts, and really prepare for the upcoming virtual session. So I'm estimating about 30 to 60 minutes of prep time. You are welcome to choose which type of learning material you engage with. Some folks like to engage in podcasts. Some people like to watch videos. Some people like to read articles. And so that's really just a space to have that continuity because we meet once a month. And again, naming that 1.5 day in-person meeting. And then finally, that's why we really spend a lot of time between selecting the final cohort, and we have that MOU outlined. We're going to be providing a $3,500 stipend for cohort members to participate, and we provide that in advance of participating in the cohort. And that's because you can use the stipend however you would like, and it can also support your travel expenses to New Orleans. The one thing I'll mention is that we cover lodging, and we also offer food during the meetings. So this is really to support, for instance, airfare if you need to do airfare, for instance, to go to New Orleans. I will pause for a second and look at my colleagues, Elena or Sunny, anything to add about this piece around lab cohort member commitment?
I think I'll just add that, life happens and we're aware. So we're looking for that commitment and intentionality, for kind of earnest engagement. That's one of the things that we're kind of looking for. I saw a question in the chat. And we do offer additional opportunities for coaching or one-on-ones if something happens that really is prohibitive for you to be able to participate. Our goal is to make sure that it's a meaningful experience. So we provide those chances. And this year we did some one-on-ones I did with cohort members, and that was a really great time to connect post New Orleans and be able to think about, how do we work towards, I don't want to say wrapping up, but kind of next phases after the lab. And so that's not in here as a required commitment, but it is an offering that we provide as well.
And sincere gratitude for Sunny. Thank you for including the full name of NOCA. So it's the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts. It's a beautiful meeting space, and we're meeting there again this year. All right. And I just want to flag, you have my email. I'll put it in the chat, trisha@farmtoschool.org. If you have any questions about the commitment, we also have a very detailed FAQ document for the lab cohort, which I believe Passion has shared earlier in our chat box as well. So that's for you to review offline. I know this is a lot to go through, especially after listening to all of those lovely and wonderful stories from our colleagues here. So I'm going to move us on and basically invite you all as we wrap up. If you're attending today on behalf of an organization, and you're not an NFSN partner already, I invite you to join our network. This is a great way to stay connected. We have an advisory board, and as you can see, our staff are located across the country. We collaborate with a lot of stakeholders and practitioners and equity folks across the country. We have over 300 partners now, I believe. So it's a really great way to stay connected. Once you join our network partner, you'll gain access to our listserv and get connected to a lot of farm to school practitioners and early care educators across the country and many others. If you're here as a community member, as an individual, we also invite you to sign up as a member. As you saw maybe earlier in the slide, we have over 20,000 members. And part of that is receiving our newsletter, where we put a lot of our resources and opportunities to stay engaged. And as Elena mentioned earlier, we are going to have our public conference in New Mexico in the summer of 2025. I think it's in June 2025, and that is open to the public. And so that's a great way to stay informed. If you're here, just use this QR code that's in front of you and sign up to receive our newsletter. With that, we have about, look at that, 4 minutes. My email is here in front of you, trisha@farmtoschool.org. And if you have any questions, feel free to stick around. Otherwise, I just want to express my gratitude for you all for joining us and listening to all of the stories today. And thank you again for your time. So yeah, I'm going to open it up for any questions. And I hope you all have a great day. I'm going to check the chat box as well. Will there be an opportunity to apply to join a 2025 cohort? Great question. That is TBD for now.
I was going
but
to say USDA. Will there? No, just kidding. And yeah, to reiterate, we are super grateful for the USDA's commitment to racial equity in the food system and for their support with this project. And oh God, there you are. Yeah, we are looking at the next stages and we really hope to be able to continue the work.
Otherwise, I will say that this past year, we did host a couple of micro series. We hosted 2 sessions to bridge the in between. So once we closed up the 2023 cohort and preparing for this webinar, we hosted a couple of micro series where we sort of mimicked how a couple of the lab sessions are like and engaged folks who are interested. So that's also an opportunity this year. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute. You would like. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you so much. Well, if there are no other questions, I again appreciate your time today and have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.